This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 351, the Friday, July 20th edition, also known as the Saratoga Opening Day edition. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you, coming to you live from the Little House on the East Side. What's special about today's show? Well, it's our first ever properly sponsored edition of the DRF Players Podcast. Very excited to report that our friends at the New York Racing Association are involved in this show, and we thank them very much for their interest in our little radio program. And I will now bring in my co-host for many of these 351 shows. Normally, he calls in from the planet Texas. Today, he's a little bit closer to home. He's also at the Little House on the East Side. He's just upstairs. I'm talking about former handicapping champion and the people's champion, Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
So tell me, this sponsorship, does this mean that my Shake Shack and my bar tab are going to be taken care of today? Is that part of the deal? If it's not, someone made a mistake.
Well, we'll talk to the DRF brass about that, JK. We'll see we'll see what kind of arrangements can be made. We might be able to get you a hot dog. The bar bill, however, that's entirely another matter. Is this your first opening day ever up here, JK?
It is. I've never made it up. I've done a couple Del Mar opening days, a completely different vibe, but I'm very excited about it. I went out to the backside today and rode around with the Prince of Keeneland in his golf cart. There's no better place than the backside at like Saratoga and just like hearing the horses, seeing the excited people. It's like a thrill like no other. It's absolutely magical.
Magical is the word that I was going to use to describe it. Years ago, before I was taken by the Daily Racing Forum, I used to be a little independent racing blogger who'd come up here for the summers, mostly as an excuse to come up here for the summers. And I wrote about Saratoga opening day and said, you know, it's like it's Christmas morning for horse players. And I think that's really what it's like. And I can only imagine that was the feeling you got back there this morning.
Absolutely. No, it's fun every morning, but today is just a little bit exciting that you can just tell people are kind of buzzing around town. And that's one of the best parts about Saratoga is that, you know, I tell people it's a little town that revolves around the racetrack for these 4, 5, 6 weeks. So it's really, really cool. I love being here. There's a lot of great racetracks in the world, a lot of great experiences and days. But I've had some of my best and most fun days here at Saratoga.
Well, let's hope that's the case over the course of the next 6.5 weeks. Folks, if you haven't been, make it a point to try to get here for at least a little bit. And if you've been, consider trying to come more. Consider trying to make this place part of your summer, something that your summer revolves around. That's what we've done in my family. Very gratified to hear my 5-year-old daughter, Perrin, the other day talking about coming up to Saratoga, and I asked her what she wanted to do, and she said, I want to go to the racetrack every day. I've raised her well, JK.
Austin's excited about it, too. He's struggling with the pronunciation. He calls it Saratoga. So he's fired up about coming to Saratoga and to get some hot dogs, and he's really excited about the Dunkin' Donuts on the front side in the morning. He likes to go over there and grab a chocolate donut and roll around, so he'll be here in a couple of weeks, and the city really works for kids. I think more than any other racetrack, like this environment just seems to kind of work for like the family vibe. It's kind of got that picnicky, outdoorsy vibe that a lot of other racetracks don't have. So it's really cool.
They can run around over there, and the town itself, too, has great options for kids. Fantastic children's museum, the carousel down at Congress Park. And, hey, if you know the right people, you can even get a little boat ride out on Saratoga Lake. I know the kids enjoyed doing that last year. Lots of good stuff happening. So the other night, our last show 350, we did a webinar. You can check that out at drf.com/YouTube or you can find it in our regular podcast feed. We did some previewing of the Saratoga meet in that. We spent an awful lot of time also on Del Mar. One of the things I want to do in this show, is continue to talk about some of the angles we've had success with over the years at Saratoga and some things that we might be looking for at this meet. But one thing that didn't work out in the webinar the other night, little technical issue, I wasn't able to answer all the questions that were coming through. I won't explain why. Just know that I wasn't able to do it. So for those of you listening live today, and I know there's a few of you out there, feel free, I've got Twitter open, feel free to hit us up with some tweets during the show. Happy to answer some questions about Saratoga, handicapping, whatever, World Horse Players Tour, whatever is on your mind, hit us up. I'm at Looms Boldly. Not sure if JK can look at Twitter or not during this call, but if he can, you can find him, and you should be following him anyway, at UT Big Hair. So let's start there. I thought of, as soon as the show was over, we ran really long the other night, and then I thought of a bunch of other things I wanted to say. There's a couple of these angles. I've looked at half of Saturday and all of today at this point, JK, and there were just a couple angles that flashed in my head of things that we didn't talk about. One of them was one thing I like to try to include up here and give a little extra credit as opposed to the bare form are horses shipping up from Fair Hill, Maryland, and that wonderful training center there, especially when you're talking about distant grass races. I just feel like sometimes the trainers down there, I think, tend to point for this meet because of the facilities there, some of the trainers down there and their skills. They sometimes tend to find a little bit more, and I've definitely hit some long shots over the years and had some nice hits in the picks by including horses who were down there. Is that something that I talked about it last year in our preview show, and I think it paid dividends a couple of times. Is it an angle I've got you looking at yet?
Absolutely, yeah. Anytime I see, I believe the workout abbreviation is FAI, correct?
Yes, I believe that is correct.
Yeah, so the track abbreviation, I look for that often. I'm thinking we got Graham Motion, probably Arnold Delacour, maybe a little Tom Proctor. Who else am I? Shug sometimes sends horses down there. Who else am I missing?
Oh, there's some under the radars. Michael Trombetta, who I noticed has a few horses entered already. He wins races up here. The percentages, again, they're not huge. They're not going to make your eyes explode out of your head if you're looking at Formulator, but when you can find a trainer who wins consistently and at prices, very often, especially again in your – they're not necessarily horses you're going to key your day around, but when you're talking about when you identify a race as a spread race, at that point you're saying, I don't really have the strongest opinion. Who do I not want to beat me? A guy like that I would certainly include in the mix. And there's you'll see it in a bunch of different instances. I'm actually having a little spacey moment. There was another person I meant to name check for sure, but I'm sure we'll get to it at some point here in the show and as we start looking at these races. But what about you, JK, in terms of pet Saratoga handicapping angles, things that you don't just necessarily see in the running lines of daily racing form that might help you catch a bet here at Saratoga, the jewel of the New York Racing Association?
Yeah, one of the main things I would tell people is when you're looking at the turf racing, you got to understand there's two different turf courses. There's an inner and an outer. The inner turf course has a tendency to be favorable to inside trips and mostly speed inside trips. I'm always looking for horses that are going to be saving ground in those situations. I think today there's a Chad Brown horse in the finale that is drawn way outside, and I believe that race is on the inner. While I'm talking, I'll double check. But that's the kind of horse that I want to try to play against, a horse like that who's going to take a ton of money for Chad, because obviously Chad is bet here, and for good reason. But this horse is going to have to be, light years the best on this inner turf course to win from the 12 hole, especially in a situation where he's a horse that kind of has a little bit of pace. So it's not like he can take back and drop over. He's got to kind of go on with it. So I make sure you're taking into consideration the inner and the outer. And on the inner, favor horses that you predict that could get the lead or horses that you predict could get those inside stocking post positions. The 1, the 2, and the 3 post position are always ones that I give a little bit of an extra credit to because either they're going to go to the front from those inside positions or they're going to drop down to the rail and save ground in what we like to call the pocket. So that's definitely one of the angles there that I love. And then we've talked about it before, is identifying the difference between the turf sprints here and the turf sprints that we'll see downstate at Belmont, the 6 and the 7 furlong variety of turf sprinting. Here it's all at 5.5, and that sharper distance usually sets up a little bit better for horses that are on or near the pace.
That's right. Race design still comes into play, of course, but I think that's a general tendency that's true. And just to piggyback on to your point about the difference between the courses, I think race design, trying to see the race in your head, how it will be run before it's run, comes into play there too, because I absolutely agree with what you're saying to maybe give a little extra credence to those inside posts on the inner, but it can also be just as helpful. It could be helpful to a horse in the 10 hole, if that horse is going to be able to clear and make an easy lead. And that factor gets ramped up all the more based on rail position a lot of time. We had our first question in, and it's about rail positions. And typically I would say, and it depends, like all these things, it depends. But typically I would say rails being out is going to be better for speed, especially on a tight course like the inner. I think that's more so the case on the inner than the outer. We talked a bit the other night about paying attention to what's going on these turf courses, especially if we get a long, dry spell. These courses can favor speed anyway when they get baked out, and it can become much harder for closers to do their thing. Another point about to the question about rails, I've seen this sometimes, but not all the time. Sometimes when the rails have been out and then they drop, it seems to favor not so much a speed versus closer bias, but an inside posts versus outside post bias, where you'll just see there's better ground, I guess, on the inside, and some horses will travel more sweetly down in there. All things you kind of have to pay attention to on a day-by-day basis, but bias is one of the things we do talk about a lot on this show, and I'm sure throughout the Saratoga meeting we'll have more and more conversations about that. Anything else, JK, you want to add to that discussion, or another pet Saratoga angle that you're looking to exploit this meet?
I was having a conversation this morning. Like I think that when it comes to Chad Brown and Todd Pletcher, those guys are going to always take a lot of money up here. There's a lot of fans that come here. There's a lot of people that recognize that those two guys are the best trainers here. They win the meet, consistently. One of the two. And so I think when you have to be smart in identifying when it's an appropriate time to lean heavily on those guys and when you have a remarkable opportunity to try to play against them. If Todd runs a first-time starter in a dirt race, he's got a really good shot at being favored. You have to try to identify which one of those are the ones you want to single and which one of those you want to take an opportunity playing against. The same thing with Chad on the turf. A lot of his first-time starters will get bet like that as well. And avoiding that hype and or buying it at the right time is advantageous. And you just have to try to play the narrative game with it when you're looking at it. See who the owners are. Is it a big day? Those guys try to win those races for their clients on big days. If Todd runs a horse on Travers Day in a maiden race, he's probably pretty good. Ask Uncle Mo. Also, you want to keep an eye out for one thing with Todd that is that a lot of people send horses to Todd because they want to get to the Derby. So they send him dirt types. If he's running a horse first time on the grass, typically one of the things I try to assume, and sometimes it doesn't work out, is that one might not be the best of the lot, because if that one was really talented and precocious and ready to kind of fire, they would probably find themselves on the dirt to find out if and when that could happen. That's not always the case.
Yeah, I can disagree. I'm going to actually go ahead and disagree with that point. And here's what it has to do with. Actually, I agree with your point if you're talking about a turf sprint. But later in the meet, when we see races going longer on the turf here, I disagree, because sometimes you'll see horses who are running on grass. I'm going, back 10 years here to pull out Big Brown. I remember being confused as to why this horse, what looked to me was going to be a dirt horse, was running on turf in the first race. And they're not carting two-turn dirt races for those distance type horses. They are carting two-turn turf races. So I think that's an important distinction to make, and you can keep yourself a little bit out of trouble by thinking of it that way. There's plenty of horses who might have a future on dirt, but it's no negative at all. It's that they and their breeding will tell you this need that distance as well.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. I mean, I of course, that is why a lot of times you'll see him in those spots. But I think that if you were going to play against a short price Todd, I would prefer to play against one going 2 turns on the grass than going 5.5 on the dirt.
Completely agree with that as well. Plenty of overlap.
And they're both going to be bet.
Right. No, that's right. And I think it's a trap you can fall into. And I did this one summer when I was public handicapping up here back in my days at the Saratoga Special bingo square for somebody. One summer I had determined in my mind that the Pletcher horses were going to be this was incorrect. I was thinking to myself that they were going to be overbet to the point where I would always try to look in a different direction. Can you imagine how poorly I did, JK, in my public handicapping picks that meet, trying to fade the Todd Pletchers in the maiden races? It was embarrassing, and it was a life lesson that you can't take a knee-jerk approach to this stuff. You've got to look at it individually. Tools like the workout report can help you determine where to rank these horses. For many of us exotic-type players, I look at it as we essentially have 4 different categories of horse, right? You've got your horses that you want to key, build your day around, build certain bets around. You've got horses that you want to press. They're not just contenders. They're contenders that you really like. You've got your contenders, your horses that you're going to use. And then actually maybe there's even one under that, which is horses you're going to use, but in a more defensive way. And then, of course, you have horses you're going to toss. Now, when you're looking at these connections that are getting bet so heavily, I almost feel like what you're suggesting is to try to make sure you put them, of those 5 baskets I just discussed, you want to make sure that the horse is in the right basket. You're not going to say, oh, the horse is probably going to be overbet, so I'm going to toss it or only merely use it defensively. You want to try to identify when the horses have to be on nearly every ticket that you're betting, and you have to identify when you're going to want to, build your day around one. And then in rare instances, you're going to want to find the ones that you can toss. Does that sound about right?
Absolutely. And pulling up our trusty formulator stat, let's take a look at Todd. In the last 5 years, he's had 29 first-time starters going 2 turns on the turf, and he's got 3 wins for 10%. And when you look at Todd across the board, he's a 20% guy across the board. And then when you can find an outlier stat that drops him down half of the percent he is in pretty much every other category, there's an opportunity there. And don't get me wrong, he'll jump up and bite you now. I wouldn't be reckless about it, like you said, like you had that summer where you were being a little bit reckless. But it's definitely an angle that you can use to kind of whittle down some tickets and to save some money and to take some stands. You got to take stands at this meet. If you look at the PPs and you play every horse that you think has a chance to win, you'll be spread too thin, and you'll be spread too wide in all of these tickets, spending way much, more money than you need to be spending on these combinations. You got to take some stands at these types of meets.
I think that's a good point. A couple other points I have about the Saratoga meeting as a whole. This is a good one. I feel like it goes back to something Mike Maloney told me when we were working on Betting with an Edge, and this didn't actually make it into the book. It was a bit of a fragment, and we didn't really fully develop it to where it could work into one of the chapters. But he described Saratoga as more of an angle meet. Do you have a guess as what he might have meant by that, JK?
Yeah, I'm assuming he means that, this is more of a you're trying to find a horse, an angle that leads you to a horse who's going to have his best performance that might not be obvious in the PPs like you might do in other racetracks throughout the year.
Brilliantly put. That's exactly what he meant. You're going to horses who point whose whole year might be revolving around trying to get them to run one big race here, who are going to be able to do things better than the bare form suggests. And an angle I've seen work here over the years in allowance races with homebreds from really good operations and or patient operations. You'll see at some point this meet, there'll be a Juddmonte homebred who's hasn't been doing that well, going shorter, going longer up here, and winning a race at 6 or 8 to 1. And it won't necessarily be a Juddmonte homebred, but there'll be a horse like that who's finally getting to do, probably in an allowance race, what it is they want to do. If you just looked at the numbers in the racing form, you'd say, this one's too slow. Maybe it could run third, and they'll go and win. And that's one that I'm not going to let get by me this meet. Anything else for you? Connections you're looking forward to, you think might have a hot meet or anything along those lines before we turn the conversation to some specifics?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I was actually going to, connections. I was going to say one of the things I like to do is keep an eye on the owner standings because, this meet, Keeneland, Del Mar, those types of kind of boutique meets, owners really want to win the title. One of the guys I always look for is when Klarovich starts dropping horses, his relationship with Chad to help Chad win the title and for him to try to win the title. Rapoli's another one. If you see these guys later in the meet, they're in contention, they start dropping horses for tags, it's not the alarm that it might be at an Aqueduct or at a Gulfstream or at a Santa Anita. It's these guys are trying to win these meets, and so they're willing. It's worth that much to them to potentially lose a horse that they entered for a tag to get another win to kind of put themselves higher up on the standings.
I have one to piggyback off that, and this is just a theory, and it could be studied further. If I thought of this before the show, I would have done a little digging in formulators to see if it could be the case. Got to figure Chad Brown coming into this meet. It must have been a little bit of a, it's his world, we just live in it, but it must have been a little bit of a sting to miss the training title by 1 last year. I wonder if, while Chad is a trainer who I usually think of as bringing horses to the races ready to fire their best shot every time, it wouldn't surprise me, and this is what you could go back and look at, if in the last month at Belmont, he had some horses coming off layoffs that were not fully cranked with the thought of getting a race into them and firing a big shot up here. So I'm going to be a little more forgiving than I would normally be if I see some Chad Brown runners who didn't run their best race in their last time at Belmont with the thought that he had maybe a little bit of Saratoga in the back of his mind and getting those extra winners that he might need to get the job done for the trainer's title this year. Do you think he'll do it, JK?
Well, you're ruining one of my points today to try to be aggressive against Chad. So I'm hoping that you're wrong at least for the day.
Selectively, you said selectively be against it. Again, if you want to be against him on me, be my guest. You'll be like 2007 me or whatever that was when I got my head kicked in.
Someone last night, we were out and about. We were some of the brave ones. We were the brave ones, and someone brought up the question, and I don't put you on the spot. Do you know, or what do you think Chad's odds are of beating Todd for the title? What would you put his odds at if we were booking it in Vegas?
You could do. There's a lot of data one could look at this. Like I don't know how many stalls and how many horses and bip to bip, but by feel, just the number that popped in my head was 3 to 5.
The Marshall Graham thought 2 to 5 or 3 to 5, and he's better. When J.K. fails at math, he checks with Marshall Graham and Eric Bialik, so I'll go with that.
Bingo. Yeah, I mean, and I was going to say to the, not to, pat myself on the back here, because I feel like if it's Marshall's answer, it is the correct answer. But I was going to say 3 to 5, and if it's wrong, it's not short.
Which one would you bet?
If I could bet, if that was the line, I would probably, I would channel my inner JK, and I'd take the chalk.
It's unfair. I don't know why you're throwing that word around like that. It's a derogatory word.
Depends who you talk to, JK. You've made a career. You've made a career out of this stuff, so I don't want to hear it. Now, this is just a funny aside. Also on the Tuesday night show, we did a lengthy lifestyle segment. And I learned something that I never knew before. I was going to tell you this off air, and I decided to save it. When you do the lifestyle stuff, people either really love it or really hate it. I had messages, the most diametrically opposed messages of people saying, that was so great, I can't wait to eat that waffle with the bacon in it. And then I had somebody say, it was so vicious. It wasn't rude, and it's somebody I've heard from before, so I wasn't like totally offended. I was just trying to listen to the opinion and say, but he said it was by far the worst broadcast I'd ever done, and it was close to having like zero value or something. I know, very harsh. I can only imagine it had to do with the lifestyle stuff, though. So generally speaking,
he clearly eats chicken McNuggets and goes to bed in his room alone at night. Come on. Everybody wants to know where to get a good burger and an adult beverage and possibly a waffle with bacon in it.
Yeah,
I tried to go to Sweet Mimi's this morning, and the line was too long, so we went to the Farmer's Hardware that I told you about, and I brought you back a egg sandwich that you said was too big.
I didn't say it was too big. It was as big as my head, but it was delicious. But there was one thing, and I think the message from that is, and we'll do this in the future, we'll keep the lifestyle stuff separate, where we'll have like a whole show that's just lifestyle, and people can hear about us talking about where to watch the races and eat and drink, and then we'll keep that and the handicapping separate, and then everybody's happy. But I did realize that I did not tip my favorite restaurant in the area, and I felt remiss in doing that. So I want to tell people, maybe it's more of a actually, I'm not sure if they're open on Tuesdays. I was going to say more of a dark day thing. But if you can get yourself down to Troy to go to Peck's Arcade, that is a restaurant I would happily go to if it was in New York City, Brooklyn, in the heart of things. I would still carve out a special place for it. Really good. Maybe we'll try to get you there one of your several trips this meet. Sounds like you're going to be spending a lot of time up here?
Yeah. I'm going to be here, this weekend, and then I'm coming back the night before Whitney and this guy that I kind of like's birthday party, and then I'll be here through the sale and through the World Horse Players Tour TV premiere on Wednesday, August 8th, and then Four Star Dave in the contest that's going to be here Friday and Saturday, a Four Star Dave weekend, 2 separate one-day contests, so I'll be back for that.
You can qualify for those at DRF tournaments. NYRA really stepping up the contest game this year. Fantastic to see them having their big event on a weekend for the first time. The Saratoga contest back in the day, even when they were Wednesday, Thursday, held a very special place for many horse players. I think it was Michael Bachuk, NHC winner, said the contest he wanted to win second most, and he was including everything in this, was Saratoga. That gives you a sense of how important a place it had in the day. And I think it will now have once again, and maybe even surpass that, these 2 live bank events on the weekend. Terry Cook last year won both days. Pretty impressive. I think it's going to be a bigger field this year. We'll see if he can capture some of that magic. Do you project to be playing in the event?
Yeah, I qualified on DRF tournaments for, I think, the Saturday edition. But I'll be double barreled on both days, so I'll definitely be back.
Entries are still available. I'm not sure when they close. I will report on that. So if you don't qualify in, like JK, at DRF tournaments, tournaments.drf.com, you can contact Dominic Labetti at NYRA or check out NYRA.com for more information on those contests. Going to be a ton of fun. I can't wait. What a great summer this is going to be. Let's talk about some racing. What do you think?
Let's do it. I got the PPs here ready to rock and roll.
Now, here's the thing, right? Like, I got a pretty good handle on the audience for the show. It's only a tiny percentage that listen live as opposed to the archive. So for the folks in the archive, not going to be super interesting when we're talking about these Friday races that have already happened by the time they listen. But as a special bone to throw our loyal live listeners, and just because I can't wait to talk about these opening day stakes, why don't we start with opening day? We just won't spend a ton of time on it so nobody gets bogged down. And if you don't want to hear it, you can hit that little go ahead 15-second button on your phone about 8 times, and you'll probably get through this. But what are your thoughts on these opening day? Actually, let's talk in terms of the whole card. What are you excited about betting today?
I'm excited about the early pick 5. I like the 7, the Tom Amoss horse in the first race, also the Mike Maker in the first race. So I'm going to try to survive with just those 2. I'm going to spread in the turf sprint, just using everything that looks like it has a pulse. It's a 5.5 for 2-year-olds. That's a tough gig. I'm going to use the 3 horses in the 3rd, the 2, the 3, and the 6. Then I'm going to try to get cute, and one of the reasons I'm excited about it is I'm going to try to beat Todd in the 5th, the 2-year-old filly maiden race. He's down on the rail. The horse is supposed to be nice, but there's a bunch of horses in here that I think are kind of live, like this Leah Giramati horse. The 2 Brass Ring has showed speed, and the debut was Barry down on the inside. Eddie Keneally's horse has been working with a talented older type. The Steve Asmussen horse looks live with Phoenix Thoroughbreds and our buddy Tom Lute and the Ralph Nix horse and the Rudy Rodriguez. Long story short, there's a bunch of horses I think can beat Todd, and I'm going to take the chance that down on the rail, it's going to be tough for this one as a first-time starter. And I could be wrong. The horse could win by 6, but I'm going to try to get cute here and try to beat what should be the favorite in the last leg of the pick 5.
I like it. I don't want to spend too much time on the stakes, but let's talk about them quickly, JK. Where did you end up?
I am the 2-year-old race is tricky. I'm opposed of the 3 Cassies. That's what I'm going to do. If one would do, what does he need all 3 for? I'm going to give this Todd horse another shot here. The one that won down in Monmouth. I think a lot of people will say like, well, if this is one of the quality ones, why was he at Monmouth? Why wasn't he at Belmont? I'm not going to try to overthink that. The horse ran really well. I'm going to use that one, and I'm also going to use Asmussen's horse, Lady Apple. Give
me a name and a number on your top pick, please.
Okay, yeah. The 2, Nona Madeline, and I'm going to use the 9, Lady Apple as well. The Steve Asmussen maiden who's running in a stake.
Always an interesting angle when you see that. How about the Lake George?
I'm going to try to beat Chad here. I'm going to use the 3 Daddy as a Legend, who I think is one of the most talented 3-year-old fillies that we have. Took a break and skipped the Belmont Oaks to run it this shorter distance up here at Saratoga. George Weaver's one of those sneaky guys that wins up here, and I'm going to use the 5. Good things take time for Abreu. The Madacat stables horse has run some good races in the Appalachian at Keelan and also in the Pin Oaks. I'm going to use those 2 and try to beat Chad.
I like the same too, but we talked about Daddy as a Legend the other night, and I think the other runner is very interesting. You're not just talking when you put that angle out there about trying to beat the Todd and Chad horses selectively during the meet. You're actually giving some examples of how you're going to do it, and I think folks appreciate that. Let's move on to Saturday, JK. I know you gave out the pick 4 in great detail on Out of the Gate, if I'm not mistaken. But why don't we talk about those races quickly at least? And you don't have to give away everything you said on Out of the Gate. Folks can go there for the specifics of the ticket construction. But let's talk about these races, starting with this nice A other than going 5.5 on the grass that goes as the 8th at 5:02, opening Saturday of Saratoga, Diana Day. Where did you land?
I got to hop back one race, Pete. I got to tell you one thing about a horse I want you to check out. Race 6 is a 2-year-old maiden race. Eric Gio, the most interesting trainer in the world, the 8 horse, Southern Phantom. I don't know if you've seen pictures of this horse on Twitter. His entire head is white, but the rest of his body is bay. He's the coolest looking horse. Set your alarm for when this race goes off and make sure you turn it on and at least watch the horse in the post parade. He's a really cool looking animal, so I wanted to make sure that people were aware of that. I'm spreading like crazy in the first leg, this turf sprint. I'm still trying to figure out what's going to happen with the turf. If you look at Time Forum US, you'll see that the 3, the 5, the 6, and the 10 are all projected to be 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in the early running of that race. I like their figures. I like where they're going to be in the race, and I'm just betting that one of those 4 is going to stick around. One of the parts about handicapping that it took me a long time to get used to is like you don't have to have every answer. You just have to have an idea of what's going to happen. I don't have an answer about this race. I'm going to use one of those 4 horses.
We have one of my Fair Hill horses in here, Conquest Tisfire for Chuck Lawrence, who goes out as the number 6. maybe not the best example because this is a horse who's going to take a ton of money. Definitely one I'd use. Wouldn't necessarily upgrade based on that angle, simply because it is it is very much of a spread race. So I'm not that interested in taking a short price. There was an interesting angle maybe on this number 11, Romantic Babe. Did you look at that one at all?
I see what you're talking about. Cutting back from 6 furlongs, a little bit shorter.
And also just the local form, that big win. The big win first out, and then trying the stake, easily forgiven. And then I just feel like this is the kind of horse who maybe has a little bit more than just what we're seeing here. And in the second start of the year, big price, open race, just what I wouldn't want to get beat by, probably more for underneath. But and the nice local turf work doesn't hurt either. But just one I thought that was worth mentioning at a big number.
I was actually going to point out the mention of the turf work. One of my favorite things that happens is when I see that, I love to jump into the DRF workout report and get a report on how that horse worked on the turf course. One of the things that I had to get out of the bad habit of doing was rating a turf horse based on a work that happened on the dirt. When they work on the turf, especially the turf they're going to be running on, I feel like there's some big opportunities to understand how the horse is coming into the race.
All right, I have a feeling in race 9, the Sanford, we might be on different horses, because I was very tempted to land on Lexitonian for Todd Pletcher. Is this one of the Pletchers who you are looking to play against?
That was my single, actually, in the pick.
Oh, so. Well, so this is an instance where even if you go in looking to be opposed, you're flexible enough to say this horse looks like a standout. Now, why do you prefer Lexitonian to the number 1 Sambaye? I
typically follow Johnny when it comes up here at Saratoga when it comes to Todd. I mean, I know Javier still gets a lot of good mounts for Todd, but I do follow Johnny. I think a lot of the jockey narratives can get you in trouble sometimes. But Johnny and Todd have an unbelievable record together, and especially up here. So that was one of the things. I thought the figure last time was good. The last race was impressive. Was a little bit sneaky last time. It was 3-1 on debut for Todd, but still won. And I just wasn't crazy about anything else in here. And so
I wanted to ask you your opinion on Chase Greatness. We saw Sagamore and Horacio De Paz have some winners with maidens early in the last Saratoga meet, and that figure came back strong.
Yeah, I don't. What's funny is when those things happen, when they're young horses, I show a little bit of pause when I notice that it happened on an off track. And because it happened there on an off track, the figure could or could not be right. And one of the things I like to do to dig a little bit deeper is you can pull up Timeform US and you can look at who's run back in those spots to see if they had improved or not. And for this one, I'm trying to see if the horses that ran behind him kind of franked the number, but it happened so recently ago that those horses haven't run back yet. So it's kind of a tricky thing to do, but typically I like to do that.
I love your UK slang use there. Frank the figure, frank the form. That's a great concept that a tool like Formulator enables you to use. And it can be very useful at a meet like Saratoga when you have horses coming in from everywhere. Yes, we have speed figures for all of them. Everybody's looking at those. But when you can go in that race and find instances where you can bet that figure with more confidence or have reason maybe once in a while to question a figure, either positive or negative, based on the performance of horses coming out of that race, that's the kind of thing that can give you a pretty big edge at a race like this. But all right, I think we haven't left too much meat on the bone there. You got another thought?
Yeah, I just think it's modernizing an old handicapping axiom of the key race. It doesn't necessarily. The key race tells a great story if a horse behind another horse or in front of another horse comes back and wins. But I think there's even a more complete story told by what are those horses out of the other race improving, not just winning, but still running winning type of races or improvements or move ups that could suggest that the inexact science of figure making, that possibly there is an error on the previous figure or a downgrade or or whatever, or an upgrade for that matter. So that's one of the reasons I like to do that.
It also gets into that concept of class that we've talked about before, that it could be the figure's exactly right, but you just caught a particularly good group of horses. And it certainly stands to reason that the basketball player, playing at Duke is going to probably have more upside than the guy playing on the CW Post team, even if they're both coming off 18-point performances, if you follow. Kind of mixing my metaphors here, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm just glad you didn't use one of those big words you typically use and I get lost.
That happens very rarely. Let's move on to the big one that gives this weekend its name, as far as I'm concerned. I guess people do say opening weekend, but Diana Day. It's opening weekend, but it's Diana Day. One of my favorite races up here, and this is a particularly it's kind of an interesting running of the race, I think. I guess I'll be cheeky though. So is Chad Brown going to run 1-2 here, JK, or is he going to run 1-2-3?
This is one of those spots. I've been talking about it back and forth these 2 days where I'm zigging and I'm zagging, trying to beat and or play Todd and Chad. To me, that's what this game at Saratoga is about a majority of the time. I'm gonna ride with him here a little bit with the 6 Raving Beauty and the 1 Sister Charlie. But I'm also going to give Proctor's Ledge a shot. I think she's kind of found herself as a 4-year-old. She ran one of her best and most visually impressive races here at Saratoga on this turf course. So I think that she's definitely one you don't want to ignore. The one that's really curious to me, and I'll allow people to kind of come up with their own decision, but Sister Charlie was meant to run her best race longer. I mean, that's what everyone has talked about. Chad has even been on record of saying that he thinks she'll appreciate more ground. She ran well enough at such a short price, but had kind of a weird and funny trip. I don't know what to make of her. I know that I thought that the Coolmore Jenny Wiley was going to be a little bit too short for her, and she won like a good thing. So I just feel like she has to be considered. She's going to be down on the inside. She'll save ground. She'll get cover. And there's not a ton of speed in here, so it just depends on how connected she can stay. I'm going to use the 2 Chads that are going to be taking the most money, a Raving Beauty and Sister Charlie, and then also Proctor's Ledge. One little hint. I'm not going to do it, but if New Money Honey is ridden aggressively to find the lead and Hawksmoor, for whatever reason, decides to take back a little bit, she could be a little bit dangerous. I just don't think she's as good as the rest of these. But
it does sound like the 1-2-3 Chad. You do see a very realistic scenario for it. Let's talk about Sister Charlie in the distance. I think this is a great example where the narrative and what we know people think about this horse who are connected with her is contradictory of what, if I just gave you this PP and you didn't know that information, I think you'd say, hey, maybe she's just better going shorter. Maybe this 1 1/8 is going to hit her right between the eyes. True or false?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Unfortunately, the world is full of narratives and you can't help but hear them. And I prefer to know them. But like I said, I'm not making the mistake of not using or including. I think she's definitely one that can get the job done. I actually think that of the field, she's probably the most talented of all. She's the one that I would bet a future bet on to win the filly and mare turf, but of the group. But at the same time, I'm just curious about the distance. I think we'll learn a lot more about her in this race.
Yeah, it's very unusual to see. She has the 2 seconds where she just lacked that late punch in the lane. In both instances, funny enough, to stablemates. So the narrative I'm about to spin might be very different if she'd been the only Chad Brown horse. It would be very different if she'd been the only Chad Brown horse in the race. But I remember, she came to our shores from the French Oaks. We were all super excited to bet her for the Belmont Oaks. Blazing pace there, blazing pace in the New York. Those races are supposed to set up for her. But maybe there's some other weird factor at play where being able to run in a more even pace will somehow suit her better if that's what happens. We're going to have a lot more information about Sister Charlie today.
Yes.
If you had to pick between the two, JK, my inclination would probably be to go with a Raving Beauty just because of I think she'll get a better trip, get the jump on her the same way those other Chad stablemates beat her in the past. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess if I had to choose one, I would pick a Raving Beauty. It's a hard question because I think Sister Charlie's more talented. It's just it's just that you don't know what's going to happen. You know what the trip is. And the other thing is, we don't really know a lot about Sister Charlie yet because she's only run, 4 times here?
Yeah,
so
I
think, we're still trying to figure her out. So, but I definitely do think that she's the most talented, and it's always a fun race to watch.
When it comes down to it, I guess you have to decide which factor you want to make your ace factor here. If it's going to be the talent of Sister Charlie or the better projected trip of a Raving Beauty. The way you're betting it isn't going to matter. Sounds like you're going to be using them equally.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna have to use them both. So, and not only equally, I'll try to get a little efficient if I can.
And by efficient, you mean betting them so you'll correct for the odds. In other words, the one who's going to be shorter, which you imagine will be Sister Charlie, bet a little more so you win approximately the same no matter which one wins. That's a concept we've talked about a lot on the show, efficient betting, and something that comes up quite a bit in Mike Maloney's book, Betting with an Edge as well. With that, let's move to the nightcap, JK. Mile on the turf, 50,000 claimer. Last race going at 6:54 on Saturday night. You think we'll be a little bit tired by then?
There's no way I'm going to be tired. This is too exciting. This is too exciting of a week, and I'll be tired on Monday when I get back to Austin.
Well, I'll still be here at the races. I love those quiet Mondays over there. I'm with you. The energy surge you get here is like nowhere else. Let's talk about this race. How's this going to pay out?
I'm very spready here. I used 5, 2, 6, 8, 9, 11. These are tricky. These are one of those spots where it's opening weekend. There's horses that are running for a tag. What's their reasoning behind that? And if they're first time for a tag, are they dropping them to get the win? To see how the turf course is going to play, there's no really definite speed situation here, which also makes me a little bit nervous when I'm looking at a turf race. So, like I said, I'm just going to spread here. I'm going to use this horse, Thatcher Street, has run some good races in the past. Ran well at Churchill last time. Monster B for Mark Cassio, remember, went out to Del Mar last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, ran a huge race.
Won the Oceanside, maybe.
It was one of the stakes early. I think it was the Oceanside. And I think it was the Oceanside when they had so many, they ran 2 divisions maybe.
Yeah.
So I'm spread all over the place here. I mean, I guess that the advantage would be to try to beat Hieroglyphics, who's going to be bet for Todd. But it's not that Todd can't win on the turf. It's that, I was just pointing out the 2-year-old first-time starter thing. So I'm spread all over the place here. There's really not a strong opinion. I'm narrow in between with the single of Lexingtonian and then the 2 Chads, 1, 2, and 6 with Proctor's Ledge. So I can kind of spread on the bookends of those situations.
Monster B would be my top pick. I will nominate Marengo Road. This is more of like what I'm talking about when I mention this Fair Hill angle. A horse that's a huge price on the line, goes out for Trombetta, and just in my life experience, I've seen these type of horses run their odd times in a race that I've identified as a spread race, one that I wouldn't let beat me. I want to look quickly at Del Mar. We're covered by the New York Racing Association, but I think everybody listening is going to also be paying attention. You can bet simulcast on Del Mar right from the Post Bar in Saratoga, so I think it's appropriate to talk about it quickly. Did you have a chance to look at Saturday's featured races out there?
Yeah, I did. I looked at the San Diego. It's Accelerate, obviously based on the runs he's had this year, how he's run at Del Mar in the past and took to that surface. I would imagine that he's a deserving and will remain the heavy favorite. He's 8-5 on the morning line. I'm going to go with the other saddler, Catalina Cruiser, who had that huge number back in 2017 on debut when that one won, and then was off for almost not a year, but 224 days. Comes back actually the day we were at Santa Anita, Pete, filming on Saturday of the WHT, where came back with 7-5 and won like a good thing with a 1:22 time form US, stretching out to the mile and a 16th, drew the rail, gets Drayden Van Dyke, who's been riding amazingly. I think that horse will be forward, be in the mix. Accelerate will sit off. I don't think that Sadler's going to ding-dong on the front and could get the job done.
I was certain with 2 Bob Baffert trainees in here that you'd be getting out the silver wig. I haven't seen it in a while. I haven't seen it since the Belmont. I was looking forward to getting to rub it for luck. And then you go and pick Sadler and you leave Dr. Dorr and Dabster on the sideline. What's going on?
I'm not a big Dr. Dorr fan. I think the horse is nice, but I think the horse has had advantageous trips in the races that he's run so well. And then Dabster, I tried to get cute last time in the San Carlos and play him at 9-2, and he finished 5th, beating 6 lengths. So I'm temporarily going to give up on him for the moment. So Catalina Cruiser for me, and I also gave Harlan Punch a little bit of a look with David Jacobson on the outside.
Right. So you'll keep the silver wig under lock and key. Maybe we'll see it a little bit later in the meet if we're lucky. Though possibly not. Well, possibly in the Travers. You never know what's going to happen, and he's got a couple of 3-year-olds in the barn who could go there. It occurs to me only now with 2 minutes left in the show, and this is bad, that we still haven't talked about the justifying news, JK. But I think we're going to put a pin in it, and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it on Tuesday's show. Does that seem to make more sense?
Works for me.
Okay, because the news is kind of non-news, is we don't know, we're waiting to see. So I don't feel that bad skipping it, but it's just the way with our summer break and then these shows that have come back and the start of these meets, etc. You'll have to wait to hear our thoughts on that, but you will get to hear JK's thoughts on the San Clemente.
Absolutely. I'm going to give credit to our friend Chris Addo on Twitter. He had pointed out something that grabbed my attention, and that was when you look at Timeform US, not only does the pace projector suggest that this race is going to favor horses from off the pace because it's going to be so quick early, the early pace figures of the horses that are going to be up there are all pretty swift. 116, 119, 112, 106, 112, 109. I mean, those are all pretty quick. They should fly here in front. I looked at 2 closers that I wanted. It was either going to be the 4 Miss Sienna with Mike Smith and Phil D'Amato, or the numbers aren't in in time form yet, so forgive me. But West Palm Beach for Simon Callahan. Those
9.
The best 2 closers for me. I'm going to take Miss Sienna down the inside with Mike and D'Amato. They don't hook up very often. To see them together is interesting. And so Miss Sienna for me to pick them up late as this thing falls apart.
That is interesting. Yeah, it appears looking at the stats. Maybe only 5 starters together in the last year. One of them did win, but that's interesting. I wonder if that's a developing relation there. All right, that's it, JK. We got to get over there. Thank you so much to our friends at the New York Racing Association. We look forward to enjoying their jewel, Saratoga, today and most of the next, whatever it is, 40-odd days. Going to be a fabulous meet here, and we'll be in the post bar, a.k.a. the Paddock Bar, hanging out with our friend Jimmy the Teller. Please come say hi. It's always great to talk to podcast listeners, talk racing. One other note, tomorrow I'll be hosting a little show, 11 o'clock. I think it's going to be the second floor of the Carousel, 11 o'clock, Matisse family participants. I'm not sure exactly who I've got yet, but they will. Their last name will be Matisse. They'll know more about racing than most people, and we're going to have a lot of fun talking to them. If I get a wild hair, I will Periscope that as well. Really looking forward to working with Naira on that, and hopefully again in the future. Thanks so much, JK. Thank you, producers Craig and AJ, Travis Stone for the voiceover up top, Willie Nile for our awesome theme song. For more of his music, check out willienile.com. We'll be back on Tuesday. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. May you win all your Saratoga photos.